Okay, everyone, I think we are ready to make a start. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Zoe Sinclair, and I am the founder and director of This Can Happen Global, which is all about empowering workplace mental health, and also Employees Matter, which is about supporting staff in their place of work. We are absolutely delighted to have organised this event for our charity partner Beyond today, and I can't thank you enough for joining us both here in the room and for the, I can't quite see, but we're around the 600 mark online. So thank you all for joining us. Beyond is a youth mental health charity tackling the growing mental health crisis affecting young people in the UK. They address the lack of access to support and create opportunities for early and personalised interventions. There are many of the Beyond team here today, so I'm sure they'll be very happy to chat to you. But we have raised a substantial amount of money for the charity today. So a huge thanks to you. Special thanks especially must go to Northern Trust, who really have contributed a lot to today's session, and all the other companies, many of you that are watching are representing today. Obviously, huge thanks to UBS for giving us this wonderful venue, who have the most amazing tech team here who are streaming this all on Zoom. We really can't thank you enough. We wouldn't have been able to do it without you. So today we are in the midst of Children's Mental Health Week, and the theme for the week is My Voice Matters. Now, My Voice Matters, in my opinion, could mean anything, but we were really hearing very often about neurodiversity, the whole concept of the voice of neurodiversity. So that is what we decided to focus on today. I'm going to be in conversation with our wonderful guests, who I'm going to introduce to you in a minute, but I really would love you to be involved as well, and we're going to leave plenty of time. For those of you that are in the room, you have got a microphone in front of you, on a seat in front of you, and if ever you want to ask a question, I will acknowledge that it's you, pull out the microphone and press the button on the microphone to be able to be heard. For those of you on Zoom, I have my computer here, I have the Q&A box or the question box open. I will be referring to them at all times during the session, so please feel free to send in any questions, either anonymously in the Q&A box, or if you feel happy to everyone. I'll be monitoring both of them. So without further ado, I am going to come over here and would love to introduce you to my esteemed guests. So first of all, only because I've written it this way, not because of the way we've written, everyone's sitting, we've got Carrie Grant MBE. So delighted that she's here. I'm sure many of you will recognise her. She's an award-winning broadcaster, vocal coach, leadership coach and campaigner. She has 4 children and is a passionate campaigner about adoption, autism, ADHD, invisible disability, and so much more. But she's also a patron of Beyond. Many of you might have been expecting Johnny Benjamin, the founder of Beyond. Unfortunately, he hasn't been able to make it today. As I said, he is the founder of Beyond, but he is currently abroad. We have the most fantastic stand-in of Jeremy here, and he is a youth board member of Beyond, so representing Beyond as well. He is a co-founder of a student-led initiative named Breed Union, and with his sister, who's also here, and a fellow Beyond youth member. And they developed a program focused on peer support groups and personal development programs for students. Jeremy is now a community facilitator, a coach, a mentor, and he's also here today to talk about his lived experience of neurodiversity. Finally, and by no means least, I want to introduce you to Dr. Rina Bajaj. She's an award-winning chartered counselling psychologist and a published author running her own practices in London. She has over 17 years of experience within the field of mental health and well-being across a range of industries, including the education sector, which I'm sure we're going to get to today. Rina supports Beyond as well to clinically approve providers within Beyond's Youth Mental Health Directory. So thank you, all of you, for joining us today. I'm really excited about this conversation. Carrie, I'm going to come to you first of all, because actually, even when I was doing my introduction and I was using the term neurodiversity, I realized that language is a very big area in this field, and neurodivergence, neurodiversity, neurotypical, just to lay the foundation. Can we just talk about language?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, neurodiversity is all diversity, so that's everything. Neurodivergent is a mind type that is different to what we would call neurotypical. Now, the language that we have had historically is there's normal people, and then there's people that aren't normal. And then we have to ask the question, who decided what was normal? It was probably some white men in their 50s that, sorry if you're a white man in your 50s, but just decided in history that that was what would be the like the gold standard. And I suppose what's lovely about doing meetings like this is that we're bit by bit stretching that concept of what does it mean to belong, what does it mean to fit, what does it mean to be with one another and understand each other. So I also just want to say thank you for creating what I hope will be a safe space where we can ask, I think we're trying to welcome today clunky questions, because if we create a safe space, and in that space we can hold, I guess, two things. We can hold the privilege that we have if we don't have these marginalized areas in our lives and we hit the normal mark, but also to think about trauma. There is always trauma that sits with people that have come from any kind of marginalization, and to just acknowledge that. And I think when we create safe spaces, it's to, yes, it might be clunky, but let's hold in mind there's someone here with lived experience that it affects them. And I remember when I'm going to talk for ages, you're going to have to shut me up.
Okay, I'm going to shut you up in a second. No. Okay,
yeah.
Okay, I'll come back to you, because actually you mentioned something really good about lived experience. So just want to come to Jeremy first of all, in terms of, tell us, and I know it's a long story, but if you can condense it, to your personal experience of I'm going to use the term neurodiversity.
And you might also have to shut me up as well, because once I get going.
It's going well so far.
Okay. So I think really it's hard to say when it kind of definitively starts, because we often think of diagnosis, and that maybe is a threshold where you have diagnosis of something. So now I do, and that's ADHD and dyslexia. And with mental health, I think we'll go into the end section a bit later. There's anxiety. There's so many things that lots of people are normalizing and understanding. But yeah, definitely to a heightened amount in my life. But the reason why I say it's hard to know where it starts is because obviously these are things that have always been within me and kind of shown up in my experience. But it was really late on where I had any sort of diagnosis or support formally for those things. A combination of reasons, I think, from an early age, was always getting in trouble and sort of socially at school. You've heard of these sort of stereotypes of the ADHD kid. And I think particularly when you're sort of a boy, also particularly at that time, a black boy, it fits into a very obvious stereotype. And that's where it gets put, as opposed to like an educational sort of need and purview. So there was that. And then I think, my parents wanted to support me and got some help from CAMS, but again, they didn't want to add another stigma, thinking there would already be these ones that I'm dealing with. So it was a choice that I managed. And I guess we talk about high performing, and it's an uncomfortable word for a lot of people, but it's just a lot of stress you put on yourselves to push through. And I did that for a long while. And eventually, right before I was trying to go to university, the school thought no chance I'd have to go into engineering, which is what I really wanted to do. And because my grades couldn't be there, but luckily a teacher sort of vouched for me to say, he gets the stuff. I think there's something deeper here, and went for a diagnosis, which was initially supposed to be for dyslexia. That's what he was pointing to, but then it kind of brought back in that opportunity to be diagnosed with ADD, which is quite typical as you get older. And if you do kind of mask and learn to keep that energy in, it gets quite internalized and it's less hyperactive.
And that's so interesting. And obviously, because I'm sure a lot of people watching and in the room may be parents.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested, you said do you think your parents, when I say thought something was wrong, I don't mean that negatively, but you know what I mean? Did they think you were being a naughty boy, or did they feel that they needed to seek help?
Yeah, I should be careful on my parents in the front row.
I'm going to pick on you later.
No, this is the kind of conversations we have and are quite normal, normalized for us to have these conversations. So, yeah, I think I probably was a naughty boy a lot of the time on top of that.
Yeah.
And it's complicated because obviously they're doing their best. And I think when the school often position it quite harshly to parents, they put it on their feet. And I, especially at a younger age, I would have been, asked to come in and pick me up, and because I wasn't behaving well or emotionally sort of in that kind of controlled, focused state. So there was definitely something wrong from that point of view. The school was saying, whether it was socially or with grades. So they did their best with, they thought, diet, tutors, whatever they could to support me. I think in terms of the more medical model, I think it's really in recent times that it's normalized from the ecosystem, I guess, of parents and schools and socially to think of, okay, maybe there's a diagnosis here and these are the routes that you can go to.
Yeah.
It's just, okay, kids need to get certain grades if they're going to survive career-wise, or they need to sort of be socially acceptable enough to have some friends, these sort of things. And as a parent, understandably, that's the primary concern.
Really interesting. Jeremy, we will be coming back to you. Carrie, back to you for a second. You published last year a book called Very Modern Family, and you exposed your family, and it was I don't know whether you felt it was a risk, but it was eye-opening for a lot of people, all about your neurodivergent family. So just tell us a little bit about that context in terms of raising your children.
Yeah, I immediately wanted to respond to Jeremy and just thinking about your parents in the front row and stuff. I think that for all parents, and maybe for us all generally, I think there is this desire, like, my child will do what they're told, and the school is right, and society knows how to do this, and I need to fit into society. So I need to make sure that actually, rather than understanding my child and really being curious about my child, I need to double down on my parenting because I'm clearly not doing it strongly enough. So then we go, I'm going to be more strict. I'm going to make sure they get into school, even though they've started to school refusing, I'm now going to push them into the car.
Yep.
And I just want to say to parents that have been through that or are going through that, just have compassion on yourself as a parent, because you are going to have to take that very lonely road of jumping ship from doing it the way that everyone's always done it. And you're going to have to choose a very narrow path, and you're going to be judged on that pathway. And you may find that if you're in a two-parenting situation, that your partner also wants to double down while you've jumped ship. And all of that is going on the parent level at the same time as this child is trying to work out, who the hell am I? And what does it mean to be neurodivergent? So in my house, we have 4 children, 3 birth, 1 adopted. They range from 29, 22, 18 and 14. Every disc that you can think of, they've got. And they are wonderfully neurodivergent. 3 are autistic. I think they all have ADHD, but only 3 are diagnosed. And they are mixed race, and 1 is trans non-binary, 2 are trans. Lots of different sexualities going on there, and mental health issues. And so we have, like, you name it, we pretty much we're experiencing that in our home. And so we've had to learn how to be the parents that these children need. Even saying that, I'm aware that, I put myself right there on the line for being shot down, because, like, no, what you need to do, love, is double down, then they wouldn't have all those issues. No, actually, I've learned how to be the parent that my children need. I've learned how to walk alongside my parent, to be strong in my role and to be confident in my role. And I think that's something I immediately want to say to parents is, if you are an SEND, so special educational needs and disability parent, you are amazing. I run a support group for over 10 years for over 200 families. They're the most amazing parents I ever meet, are the parents of neurodivergent children and parents of disabled children. And please just look after yourself. Please be good on, you're doing a great job with everything against you. Battling at home, trying to work out how to be that parent, sometimes battling a partner, trying to get them to be the parent you know that is going to work. Then you go outside the house, you're battling systems that seem to be impossible, and sometimes that battle is worse than the one that's going on in the home. Take a breath. You're amazing. What you're doing is amazing in really difficult circumstances and in a system that's not set up for you or your child.
Just to ask you one more question on this, and I hope this isn't, what I want to understand is, for you as a parent, when we're thinking about Children's Mental Health Week, what are your specific challenges with neurodiverse family?
Okay. I would say, my big question, actually, I'd love this question to be answered. Would my children, like I think about Tylen, who's spoken really publicly about this. Tylen was on and off suicide watch. Sorry if this, we are going to speak about triggering stuff today. For 3 years, we were in and out of hospital with Ty. Would Ty, and Ty's autistic, so would Ty have had mental health problems if the schools had been set up in a way that worked for all diversities? Would there have even been a mental health problem? Is it that autism causes mental health issues, or is it that the society that we live in causes the mental health issues, and then we've got a bigger problem on our hands? So I would say that with Ty, it was our second attempt where we finally accessed CAMHS. Now, we had been trying to access CAMHS during the self-harming phase before we even went into hospital, but doesn't reach the threshold, doesn't meet the threshold. One attempt in hospital. Well, you'll stumble on. You're good. Look, you know what you're doing, parents. We were praised at that point till we started becoming warrior parents. Then we suddenly weren't. Second attempt. Suddenly we did get some help, and that help, I have to say, was amazing. There are amazing practitioners out there doing incredible work in crazy circumstances and systems that are completely broken. And those people, we need to be praising you and collaborating with you and lifting you up and going, yes, yes, yes. Everybody else, look at what they're doing. It works. So for Ty, they had 2 years of therapy every other week with CAMHS. My other children struggle to even get to CAMHS or get anything that works. But for that child, it really did work. So there's good experiences and bad experiences, but too many of us have bad experiences. We know that before the pandemic, only 25% of children that were referred to CAMHS got an appointment. A quarter. Yeah. After the pandemic, that went up to, I think we got better figures, but then 39% more people were being referred.
Right. So that's super interesting, because hot off the press today, and sorry I'm reading this because it's literally come out today, NHS data this morning has said that referral to CAMHS in England have risen by 53%. Yeah. That's NHS data released today, calling it a devastating explosion. In everyday numbers, that means 600 children a week are now at crisis point.
Yeah, so we're going to have to mend these children. Yeah. Let's try and mend these children. How about we look at why they're broken in the first place? Yeah. How about we look at systemic issues and look at what is breaking our children that for us were like super happy until school started. What is going on in schools that is not working for these children? And this is now no longer just SEND. This is now just your neurotypical kids who with mental health challenges. 80% of 17 to 19-year-olds said post-pandemic they were struggling with their mental health. So we can't run away from this. It's happening.
Absolutely. And I just want to say that there's a whole barrage of positives saying, thank you so much for acknowledging parents, and that somebody has just written, it's so very true and refreshing to hear that we are doing our best in an unknown world. Yeah. Rina, just coming to you now. So clearly we've started this conversation about mental well-being and, neurodiversity. Can you expand on that a bit and, what you have seen in that connection?
Yes, I think I want to sort of address what's been raised already. I think if we think about systems, whether it's schools or mental health systems or diagnosis, it very much comes from a deficit model. And I think that's the thing that we're challenging here. We're not working enough systemically. A lot of the systems are broken. So it's either about blaming, shaming, or the brain. So the issues, if you like, remain very much within that child or that family. Yeah. And I think there is a ripple effect to that, because I think even if we think about schools or we think about mental health services, there's not enough reflectiveness. Everything's quite reactive. So we're talking about crisis point, but what about early intervention? What about conversations? What about an individualized approach to that young person? That's where the massive gap is, and funding is a big issue. But when we think about mental health, often the crisis point is too late. So, you know, thinking about how can we understand that young person as a young person? If we think about schools and education, one size doesn't fit all. So where are we stigmatizing? Where are we discriminating? Where are we kind of embedding this lack mentality? And that's the real issues where we're going to have conversations around what does it mean? So, you know, by the time a child is 14, they're already labeled probably several times. A lot of time children can take on that label. If people are going to see me in that way, I might as well act in that way. And we then start to lose sight of the vulnerability. And that's a real challenge.
Yeah. So I'd also, you've touched on schools, and I think it's, you know, parents, school is a huge part of our life. So I think it would be remiss of us not to speak to about schools, although I'm very aware that, I don't mean we're being negative, but it's, you know, I want people to go away with practical solutions today and not think, oh my goodness, the health system is completely broken, which we might think that, but I want us to think about ideas that, you know, can really help and support people. So just coming back to you, Jeremy, for a second, and I know it was a few years back, but do you remember about the support that you got at school? And what would you have liked? How would you have liked it to have improved?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think in terms of formal support, as I mentioned, it was probably only until the end last year or so of school where I had actually a diagnosis to go off of. And luckily by that point I had a school where they had the resources to give me learning support. So often these are in centres, and there's a whole conversation to be had about how those are positioned to be accessible socially, to be seen to be having that kind of support. But that worked well, and they helped me with timetabling, so executive functioning. A fancy way to say it's really hard to stay organized with ADHD. And it's just the simple things like timetabling for revision, that sort of thing. Extra time, that's gone through a few different iterations of being a bit more stigmatized and given, but it really helps with the dyslexia part as well in exams, so I have enough time to go back over and make sure I'm communicating what I need to say properly. So just those two changes in my last couple of years meant that I was able to redo my exams, get the grades needed, and go to university. And I think that's the academic sense. Socially, though, I just don't think there was really any sort of infrastructure at that point for considering if it's a social issue. And I think I'd got to such a point at that time where I was able to, and I mentioned the word masking, so many of us mask, whether that's because of how we're supposed to act because we're, you know, because of our gender or because of the conversations of today. I think I'd learned how to be neurotypical enough to have friends, and I knew where my place was there. But things like sport, for example, can be really useful just to get that energy out and sort of feel comfortable in that kind of environment. So that was really helpful for me. I took up 2 sports at school, and that kept my energy low enough to focus in lessons, put it that way. Right. So I'd say those are some of the best ways that school helped me with the needs that I had.
Fine. And Rina, have you seen anything that schools are doing, or anything that you would recommend to parents, how they create that relationship with schools?
Yeah, I think we need to create safety both within the home. And when I say safety, I mean sort of emotional safety, and also within schools. So schools, just by the nature, have become very reactive because there's so much stuff happening all of the time. You know, there are amazing teachers and school staff and amazing parents. I think it can get lost in the chaos sometimes. So when a school's thinking about what they can do. I think it's thinking about where you can engage different members of the community. So how are you bringing parents into school, particularly in secondary school? How are you thinking about individual needs of young people? Do you have people like TAs? Where are you using your budget in terms of well-being? Can you do sort of quick grounding sessions or teach sort of grounding skills or emotional regulation skills to all pupils across the board? Can you work with children or young people to think about what it is that you can do to help them? So it's a combination of those individualized approaches, but then you could also think about how you support teachers, just like you think about how you support staff within a workplace. So where are their reflective spaces? How are you helping staff to focus and model taking care of their own well-being? So this needs to be a systems-wide approach from sort of the leaders all the way throughout the system.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. Carrie, from a parent point of view, how have you managed that maze of schooling?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that school isn't the system. School is working within a system, and that is a really important thing to hold on to when you walk into school spaces, because they are either saying we are going to do it exactly as the system says, that's what we're doing, by the book, because that's how we want to do it. My favorite people along the way, and I've had one child with 3 permanent exclusions and had another one school refusing, another one that's in an autism school that's amazing. I've had lots of different experiences, good and bad, but the people that I have loved along the way are the people that will say, we don't normally do that, but give me a rule breaker every time, because the people that break the rules are the people that create change, and the people that create change are the people that are going to be making advancements in the future. They're the people you want to watch. The people that will start to say, you show up as yourself. Can you, like here today, you people sitting here, can you show up as yourself? Really be who you are? Because if you're not able to do that, then you're masking. And masking is not going to be great for your mental health. And we live in a very polarized society where part of it is saying, everyone just line up and do not step outside the lines. And the other side is going, call me woke, I don't care. I want to show up as myself. And look at you being yourself. And look at you. Wow, aren't we amazing? What a great group of people. And seeing the joy and the energy that comes in those groups. That's what I want to see in school. So in a way, that's a broader answer. But to me, that's the ethos. You meet teachers who have that instinct that go, I don't know some teachers don't know anything about autism. I don't know anything about autism. I'm really sorry, Mrs. Grant. Help me out with your child. And they were just great to work with.
Yeah.
There were some teachers who just got it. You just like, maybe they're on the spectrum. They've got something going on that's a bit neurospicy anyway, so that they're going to get it. And then there were the people that thought they knew. Oh my gosh, God help me with these people. They are the hardest people, because you've got to undo what's already sitting there. And that's why we have to commit to curiosity. Forget reading, writing, and arithmetic. Let's put in curiosity, creativity, community. For me, the 3 C's, that's what we need to start thinking, even if we're working within a system, break the rules a little bit. Come on, stretch it. Let's create something where people feel like they belong. Because if their mental health is right, everything else begins to flourish. If you feel safe, what you've spoken about, everything else can flourish. But that foundation has to be there. If it's based on fear and exam results, and if you don't get this and you don't line up, you don't do it just like everybody else, there's always going to, that feeling of fear is not going to bring the best results.
Yeah. I just want to talk for a second, again, with kind of the parental lens in mind, about diagnosis.
Yeah.
Pros and cons, parents thinking something's not quite right, but could it be normal child school behavior? So I think actually, Jeremy, I'll start with you, because you said you didn't have a diagnosis till later. And what difference has that made for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's complex, but for example, take the dyslexia diagnosis. I had a lot of frustrations around the fact that, for example, because I can understand the material and really my parents, my mum growing up, particularly when she's helped me with reading and writing before I guess secondary school, where that's a much bigger part of it, she knew that I got it, and so it was perceived to be laziness if my struggles, and I almost think that she had similar struggles, whether that's for whatever reasons, and I think it's that fear that if you can't sort of have the English reading and writing level, the barriers that has for you socially in the workplace. So I think it was fear-based, but it was to help me, to really push me through. And I think when you have that laziness aspect, it's a big stigma to overcome. And so I actually looked up myself, and I was convinced that I had dyslexia, and I tried to advocate for that for myself, and that was a bit of a losing battle. And so when I did win that, I kind of felt like a told you bum kind of thing.
Yeah. So, sorry, but why was it a losing battle? Nobody was listening to you.
Yeah, I think people box in certain things, and dyslexia means, oh, if you're dyslexic, that means the words are all jumbled up, and you know, you couldn't possibly know this many words or whatever it might be. And so if you fit outside that, it's just, oh, you picked up on a word and using it as an excuse.
Yeah.
Whereas dyslexia sometimes can be jumbled words. It also can just be internal. So it's just about opening up what that looks like.
Yeah. It's really super helpful. Rina, in your industry, how important or useful is a diagnosis?
I think it depends what happens pre and post diagnosis. So for me, what is that diagnosis there for? Is it to get access to a service? Is it to understand your needs a bit better? Is it to open up discussions? And I am seeing, like, within my practice, lots of people kind of getting later diagnoses. But it also makes me think about what was missed prior to that. You know, how much energy, mental energy, emotional energy has gone into sort of sustaining or masking, or, you know, what has happened in terms of their vulnerabilities being missed. So I think with a diagnosis, it's a very individual thing. I think having a discussion around maybe the purpose or why or how people feel about it, but also it's important for people to recognize that they're much more than their diagnosis. So if it's a way sometimes to get into services or to get support, then I think that's kind of the negotiation that we're in at the moment. So as Jeremy said, it's quite complex.
And Carrie, in your experience, how easy has it been to get a diagnosis?
I think about my son. It's my 14-year-old. It took years, and that's with access to services. It took years. I think sometimes there's a reluctance to label, but I think that's because you were saying, you know, we have a deficit model. So there's this thing of, you know, that's going to make you feel bad about yourself. A label is only a problem if you've got a problem with the label. I don't have the problem with being autistic. I'm fabulously autistic. And that's who I am. That really helps me to understand my strengths and my challenges. And I know when I was diagnosed, they said to me, I was only diagnosed last year, you've created the environment in which you most thrive. And I sat with that. That was probably the most profound sentence that came out of the whole assessment. And that really made sense to me. But it also then raises the question of, how do we create environments where people can thrive? You know, so most people wouldn't, well, actually people have been saying for years, you're sure you're not autistic, but a lot of people wouldn't notice that. And I'm not masking. I don't even like the word masking. I hate the word masking, because I feel like I want to be the most authentic person. So the concept that I'm being fake really doesn't sit comfortably with me. But the diagnosis is really helpful. So I think for a child, quite often children are diagnosed and they don't know they're diagnosed as well. That's the other thing. I think we all assume, oh, a child got their diagnosis and they got told at 7 they were autistic. The parents were told, but then loads of our parents are like, when do I break the news? It's like the adoption question was the same. Yeah. You know, when's the optimum moment to say this thing? And that is because we have such a negative view of being these words. I think if we went online, if my kids at the age of 7, Thailand's now 22, had put in, I have autism, what does that mean? They would have had a wholly negative response. Whereas now I think there are other voices in there, and we need more of those voices. And I have to say, one of the greatest voices, I think for me, the lived experience, those people are the actually autistic, the actual, like hearing you speak, you're like, yes, it hits home. But also we need allies. We need the allies that are going to stand in there and speak up. So for me, I think everybody that has got something going on that they have got questions about, they're curious about, I would be saying, get an assessment.
That's really useful. I want to say, got loads of questions coming in here, so many, but I saw Mr. Lyons, Jeremy, oh, not Mr. Lyons, Jeremy Dad. Sorry. Language, I'm sorry. just wants to say something. Just push the button on the microphone. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, what I wanted to say was that first and foremost, I'm immensely proud of Jeremy and what he's achieved so far. But as a parent, when we found out that he was slightly different from most of his peers, as a father who's from a very typical African background, I guess I found it really difficult to deal with it. And I was always loath to put him onto any kind of medication because I remember being in New York once at a friend's house, and they had a child who had ADHD, and they'd given him medication, and this child was just sitting there really subdued, didn't seem to have any kind of personality. And I was just really, really worried that, you know, if we'd done likewise with Jeremy, that he would lose some of his spark. So, you know, now that he's on medication, I obviously now realize that, you know, my fears were a little bit misguided, but, you know, it's really challenging for us, obviously, as parents. So, you know, it's a tough one to come to terms with. And even to date now, when we have text exchanges, I get really, really frustrated at some of the things that he puts down on paper or on text. And, you know, I'm sort of like always just freaked out by it. But, you know, I'm constantly learning. So I'm really glad I'm actually here today, because obviously I can hear firsthand some of the challenges that he's had to go through.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for that and for your honesty, for sure.
Can I also just jump in slightly and say thank you? I think we need to do more when we talk about culture and expectations, and actually particularly for immigrant culture, because there is like the perfect immigrant model that what you're meant to be like and be like, there's even more pressure. So we need to be having these conversations where we can talk openly about this stuff across, I mean, I see it across a whole range of cultures, not just an African culture. And it's how the family reacts, the extended family react, and what happens if my child's different and they won't achieve anything. Oh my gosh, the shame that that's going to bring. So all these things, they don't need to be discussed with the child, but they do. Those wider conversations do need to be going on. So thank you for bringing that up.
And I want to refer actually to a question, continuing this thread. Someone has said, as a parent of a child who is at the beginning of the process of my 4-year-old diagnosis journey, I'm going through my own journey, grieving my expectations. What safe spaces would you recommend to also talk as a parent who feels lonely, walking this unknown path? I think that's a really great and honest question.
Thank you. And so,
really great.
We started our group 11 years ago to help parents, help ourselves actually, because we wanted to meet other parents. And often when your child is in mainstream school, you don't meet other autism parents. And so, and often the children are not yet diagnosed. And so we started a little group that was like 10 people. And before we knew it, it had grown to over 200 families. And it's still the greatest joy for me is when I sit in my lounge and there might be like 40 parents in the room, and there'll be 1 or 2 new parents, and they're nervous and they're sitting there and they're thinking, I'm not going to fit here. I don't fit anywhere anymore. And then they hear people talk around the room and the tears start. And you realize that, every autistic person's different, every neurodivergent person's different, but there are so many things that are the same. And the feeling ostracized, feeling confused, feeling grief, worrying about their future, worrying if they'll stay alive, all these issues and challenges and feelings about yourself as a parent, all are sitting there for all those parents. And I think the best place to find compassion and empathy is with like-minded people, other parents. Gather groups, build it and they will come, believe me.
What's the name of your group so they can find it?
It's just the Grant's Autism Group House now. But, you know, I think wherever you are geographically or online, whatever your comfortable space is to do that, even if it's going for a walk with one other autism parent once a week or once a month around the park and just talking, that really helps, because you realize people are at different stages in their journeys, and that overlap is wonderful.
Gosh, I'm so sorry that we haven't got a 3-hour session today, because I've got like 50 questions and every one I'm going, I've got to ask that. And then I've got all these questions. But I really, again, anyone in the room, please put up your hand, because I want to start kind of mingling what we're saying with this. So we'll come to you in a second. First one. I actually just want to, I think a really interesting question here, because we've been talking about ADHD, autism, whatever, but someone has actually said, you know, what are the signs I should be looking out for? I mean, I think that's such a valid question. So the particular ones that somebody has said for are, you know, how do I know if my child could be autistic or have ADHD? Carrie, I don't mean to keep coming to you again, but because those two are specifically, you know, in your family, could you just, and I know not everyone's the same, but as a parent, you know, what signs should we be looking out for?
I hate the word spectrum. I hate so many words that we have to, language is so problematic. But I think if you have a child that is in mainstream school and they are struggling, and then you go to the teacher and so they seem to be fine here. And then when they come home, they are melting down. By melting down, the difference between just being a naughty kid and a meltdown is massive. A naughty kid will like shout and scream and then think, oh, it's not working, and flip within 10 minutes. A meltdown lasts a good half an hour and takes probably another hour to really properly recover from. So that's the immediate thing. So you're looking out for those behaviors. Often if a child is struggling at school but behaving like really well and fitting in, and then melts down at home, it's because school's the issue. Often as parents we'll be told the same, well, different. We'll be told they're fine at school, must be something you're doing at home. No, it's because school is so stressful and anxiety raising that by the time they get home, they are spent. So there is, I would say almost every autistic person that I've ever met, this is just my experience, and actually a lot of people that have neurodivergence in other ways, anxiety is one to watch. Just watching how their levels of anxiety are working, what they are doing, how they have to take themselves off. My children started putting their hands over their ears, or they would say, I don't want my food's touching, but the more anxious they were, the more rigid they got about this stuff. So there is a flexibility within that sometimes. Foods don't want to touch. I can only sit at this point on the table, because if someone sits in that chair, I won't know who I am. I'm undone. Struggling with homework, really. I mean, mine, I just said I'm not doing homework. No one's ever, if you do home up to the age of 11, you can do homework all day long, but it's not going to make any difference to your exam results. So take that pressure off. Otherwise parents have a nightmare. But just looking also socially, if they are that child where you're having to construct every single play date and it's not happening naturally, I would be asking questions about those things.
Okay, no,
labels, all the obvious ones, like, you know, the sensory stuff is also, they're great indicators.
So there's a couple of points that I want to ask you, and then I'm going to get completely to the room and to the question. Right at the beginning, we talked about kind of the intersectionality of neurodiversity, and you alluded to, you know, Black little boys being naughty. Can you expand a little bit on that and link to neurodiversity and the intersectionality of everything?
Yeah,
and it's a huge question. You could talk about it for an hour, I know, but
no, it's fine. Yeah, I think, you know, as I say, whether we're talking about diagnosis or we're talking about so many other categories, people like to categorize, whether that's sort of socially or teachers or parents. And I think because you have the factors we've already spoken about today in terms of other reasons to be hypervigilant or anxious or stressed, that might come through ACEs as a sort of like an education word, but having some sort of adverse childhood experiences, a lot of those can manifest and look like ADHD. And because they're so normalized within, for example, Black boys, because of what we know to be the sort of disadvantages often in society, it's sort of assumed, oh, it's because of their background or it's because of their family or whatever else it might be. And then there's sort of, there's a lot of consideration. Okay, well, maybe, yes, they do have these ACEs, these things at home. That doesn't also mean they have some sort of neurodivergence as well. So I think it's just those things are conflated. But then I think the issue is maybe the punishment, there shouldn't be a punishment for either. It shouldn't be, well, because they're misbehaving because of whatever other reason. It shouldn't be this case where we're ostracizing them and putting them to detentions, labeling them to their face as the naughty boy. You know, I work with boys in schools often, and I went into a school the other day, and the teacher said, "Good luck with them. You're basically wasting your time." I wouldn't name the school. And I came in the room.
Go on.
And I come into the room, and the boy said, "Good luck, said we're a nightmare." And I said, "You've just called yourself a nightmare. Where have you got that from?" And by the end, I sort of say to them, "This is just what you've been told all the time. You guys, it's just you're latching onto that sense of identity. It's the same sense of control, where at least if I do this, I can have something to expect of how people will receive me. But you give them an opportunity to be someone else, and so much more comes out. And I've had teachers say, I've worked with these boys, or I've been a teacher for 30 years. I've never seen that side of them. So yeah, that's what it is for me. Okay. And sort of my final sort of formal question, as I said before we get to all these questions and the audience, I'd just like to touch on trauma, as we just discussed that sort of a little bit earlier before we started. How do you think, are we a traumatized society? Have parents got, are our children traumatized? Is this, what is trauma doing for our children today?
Well, I think we are definitely more reactive, which can then push us into fight or flight, which means that we don't necessarily think more holistically or make good decisions. So I think we can work on kind of becoming a bit more reflective as a society. I think we are seeing an increase in trauma, but I was just reflecting on what you were saying there, Jeremy, about an overlap. So is it trauma? Is it anxiety? Is it ADHD? Is it autism? And often it's a combination. And I think we're very quick to try and categorize people into categories to either get access to services or to understand them through a particular lens. So I think we can apply a trauma-focused lens to the work that we do or the interactions that we have. And a part of that will be creating safety. A part of that is around sort of understanding that individual's needs. A part of that is looking at the vulnerabilities, but also the strengths. I think there might be sort of multiple marginalization of certain kind of intersectionalities. So I think we really have to expand and start thinking a bit more holistically around how trauma can present. So trauma is sort of much wider than one specific event or a series of events. It's about how we maybe feel under threat, how we feel unsafe, how we question our identity, how we hold on to some of these shoulds and musts and have tos and ought tos. So it can become embedded in our identity, but not necessarily responded to, particularly if we're labelled in kind of derogatory ways or negative ways.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, lady at the back.
Hi, thank you. I think there's so much in what the panelists have said that has really resonated with a lot of us in the room, online, and what I'll take back to my organisation and cascade to them. There's been a bit touched on about CAMS and the complexity of the, like, what I'm calling sort of the referral pathway and the diagnosis pathway. And one thing that I hear a lot and have experienced myself is the sort of first step of, oh, well, we'll just give you as the parents a course. So we'll do 6 weeks, CAMS, we'll do 6 weeks with you once a week and we'll give you a course and that's how we're going to support your child. And I'm going, no, that's going to do nothing to help my child's neurodivergence and their mental health. This kid needs the support. I don't need the support. So I'm just interested in panelists' reflections sort of on that and their experience, and how you think about addressing that.
I can hear Carrie chuckling away, so I think we should ask her to answer that.
With you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny. I recently discovered there's a thing. There's forensic CAMS. Forensic CAMS is called FCAMS. I was like, parents have always called it FCAMS. But yeah, family therapy. I'm sure that somewhere out there, it works for some people. I just have never met anybody that it works for. So in a CAMS context. And that is because by the time you actually get that appointment, parents are on it. They're reading, they're Googling, they're online, they're reading books, they're going to see Tony Attwood or whoever is the latest person. That's who we went to see back in the day. And you are learning how to parent. You are retraining how to be present and be with your child, and gentle parenting and nonviolent resistance, which was the way we did it. It was amazing. All this stuff you're learning. And then you finally get that appointment. They go, we've got an acronym for you. It's called PLAY. P is for peace. And you're like, right. And really patronizing stuff like, have you thought about listening to your child? Oh, God, give me strength. that is not collaboration. We need to get better at this stuff. We need to understand that parents are not only parents. Parents have run businesses. Parents have gone to work. Parents have led their lives. They've had relationships. They've got all this rich asset, all these assets sitting within them, like any leaders sitting here. You have all these assets. What are we doing about the assets? What are we working from? The same as we should be doing with the child, we need to do with parents, rather than going, well, you've probably got this wrong. So what you need to do is something right. And here's our nice acronym we've just invented to tell you how to get it right.
So what do we do? What do we do as parents
We
when we're
have
told?
to go in and say, collaborate with me. I'm an intelligent human being. You have to actually declare it. I know I'm doing, and every time they go, yeah, we've got the acronym, you say, yeah, I've got one, NVR. I do NVR. So nonviolent resistance is going to tell me all these things. Now tell me the extra bit because it doesn't work on this bit for my child. And there has to be a negotiation rather than a, oh, well, I don't believe. There's so little belief because the system is so much easier when you're under pressure and, you know, you're 3 therapists down and there's only 2 people trying to do everyone's caseload, to just go, it's the parent, rather than us all going, actually, the system is the issue. But what can we do here today? We've got an hour, we've managed to get this hour. We want to get the most out of it. I'll tell you what we don't need. I'll tell you what we do need. And if you're prepared to break the rules, you're going to warm my heart. So it's actually leading as a parent. Going in, you don't have to be warrior parent, you can be gentle, but it's leading. You have as much entitlement to be a leader in those meetings. You are not just sitting there waiting to be told the doctor says I should do this. Lead in that. Don't be afraid to lead and to represent your child.
Great. Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm just going to a question here. Question for Jeremy. My daughter has ADHD and is dyslexic. She is a bright girl, but struggles a lot with executive function. She's about to go to university in September. Whilst at school and under 18, you have other people around you to support and help you to achieve. How were you helped at uni? And then what happens out in the real world?
Good
Great
question.
Yeah.
Great question.
Great question. But I've got like 50 of them. So, I have to apologize in advance. We can't get to everyone, but to this one.
Yeah, no, really good question. Okay. So I think school is set up so it's so goal oriented around just make it to university. And I think my anxiety, the little systems that I'd hacked within that got me there.
Yeah.
Those completely shift once you're there. It could be that you're in a different environment, the sports, the friends, all your usual little systems will shift a little bit, maybe even family support. And I think it's about finding those systems as well in your new place. They'll often give you, so for example, if you should be able to get funding for, I think, free printing, you should be able to have a designated person that you can go and speak to about extra time or redoing and delaying coursework, which is a massive pressure with deadlines and that sort of thing. So there are all these things that aren't necessarily known that you can apply for. Sometimes even free laptops, where there's software that if you don't feel comfortable typing, you can just sit it there and not take notes, because I cannot take notes and concentrate.
Yeah.
It'd take me half the lecture just to write the word down.
Right.
So little hacks like that, little bits of software where you don't necessarily have to show up as different as well.
Yeah.
In school, it's quite awkward because you have to go to a different building, whatever else, but you can just have a laptop like everyone else does.
Yeah. And
it's a bit of a software that just makes it that bit easier. Or it's a deadline extension that, again, is handed in separately. So it's just kind of creating your own little systems and realizing it is a bit of a different space.
Yeah.
In terms of the world of work, I think I think you mentioned this earlier about finding areas where those are strengths. Rather than, so find the careers where either the organization themselves are universally designed so that reasonable adjustments for things like software, for flexible hours, whatever it is that you've relied on up to now that's been successful. If they're willing to do that, that's the kind of organization you want to be in.
Yeah.
If it's a career where that's more normalized, maybe because it's slightly more creative career, again, lean into those things.
Yeah.
So I think a combination of making use of what's already there and creating systems that work for you and constantly, going between those.
Great advice. A question in the room? Yes.
Hi there. I have a question. So I'm not a parent. I have godchildren and I have a godson. And I think that he should, I don't know how to say this. exactly. I don't know how to say this to my best friend, that I think she should see someone, particularly because I'm not a parent, or maybe it would be the same if I was. I just don't know how to approach it. But I love her and I love him as well. And he's 7, and I am trying to help, but I want to help in a helpful way. Is there any advice around that?
Great question. Great question.
You're amazing.
Rina, what would you say to that?
So I think letting her know that you love her is probably the most important thing. And I think, there's no right or wrong way to say things, but maybe just thinking about what you're noticing, like why you're concerned or why you're worried, without the shoulds or the musts. A very empathic approach. If you think about, if someone was to come up to you saying, I think you need help with this, you're going to be a little bit more defended. But if you're kind of a bit more exploratory and you're kind of bringing in what you've noticed and why you care, and actually the love for your godson, but also stating your position, like, I'm not a parent, but this is what I'm noticing. How is it for you? So it might be the first space where they're able to really just express how they're feeling. And I think these conversations happen tentatively, kind of over a period of time. You're not going to kind of solve something in one conversation, nor is it your role to sort of fix things at that point. But I think, you could also think about practicality. So how can I support you? Can I find out any more information? What would be useful? So it's allowing the space to kind of validate what you're noticing, but also maybe your friends' kind of feelings, emotions, thoughts, and creating space to reflect. And then, can I help you? Or is there something I can do to collaborate with you, rather than saying, this is what I think you should do or must do or have to do, because that might be received slightly differently.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm going to read a question here that actually sums up lots of questions on the same theme. And I think it really around allyship, which you said, I love people like you. And I think, so the question is, I have a question for the panel. My neurotypical daughter is in year 2 and 3 children in her class at school who are neurodiverse. And I'm unsure how to explain to her what that means or what role she can play to support her friends. I'm not convinced the school are equipped to do this. And there's been many questions about, my children are neurotypical, how do you explain to them? I want them to be included. And you know what? We need allies in this area, right? I think that's hugely important. Jeremy, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think the thing that comes to mind is, I think we've spoken about diagnosis and the difference between neurotypical, neurodiverse, and so on, as useful labels. I do think there's something in just being, I think I mentioned universal design earlier. Everybody has their own set of needs, and the group can be neurodiverse. And so if her daughter has things that she's quite particular about or has preferences, kind of having a space where every student can share those things. So it's not always on one student to be, oh, I'm a little bit different about food or sensory things. All of those kids will have things that they're masking, maybe to a lesser extent. And if the whole group has a culture of constantly being able to kind of add their preferences without that shame, it means that it's so much easier for anybody else in that group, whether they have a diagnosis or not. So I'd say really normalizing it, because at school, the hardest thing to do, and we can all probably attest to this, is fitting in and feeling just like everybody else in a sense, but also bringing some of yourself obviously into that dynamic. So that's where my goes to.
Amazing. Time is up, and I can't believe it, but I'm going to ask each of you to give me a very quick one piece of advice for families, for parents listening and in the room, bringing up a neurodiverse family, whether they have a diagnosis or not. What's your one piece of advice, positive advice for them to go away with today? I'm putting you all on the spot now, I'm sorry. Rina.
So I would say sort of find your allies, find your support, but also even practically look at things like the Beyond website, for example, the directory.
Absolutely.
So there'll be things on there which you can kind of use to start your own thinking while you might be waiting for referrals or things like that.
Yeah. Okay, great. Jeremy, come to you.
I think lead with curiosity, not fear, and that's a bigger thing to say, and model vulnerability. Use their language. If they're gaming all the time, maybe that's a safe space, maybe that's a socializing. Don't assume what that looks like for them, and just be curious. Oh, what is that doing for you? and model that yourself. Oh, I do that thing as well.
Yeah.
I pick my nails when I'm feeling anxious. I see that you do this thing. Is that a similar thing for you?
Yeah.
Make it seem a connection there, even if they're slightly different media.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. And Carrie, last thoughts from you.
Yeah, I'm going to be cheeky and take two. I'm going to have one for parents, which is remember in all your empathy that at the end of the day, you need to remember to climb out of your child's skin and remember who you are, because you are still who you are. Look at yourself in the mirror and go, I do that. I'm Carrie. I am not Thailand today. I must remember I'm who I am. That's important. And I think also for our children, we don't need to fix our children. I think I know this is very common amongst dads, particularly they need to solve. And as parents, we think, I'm going to solve this problem. And it's not a problem. It's your child. And I learned to sit on the edge of my child's bed for 1 minute a day. And they'd say, can you just leave? And then they'd time the minute and then tell me to get out. And I did this for a week. And after a week, I upped it to 2 minutes and 3 minutes and 4 minutes. So I just sat there. And they said, oh, you're doing that weird thing when you sit on the end of the bed, Mum. Like, yeah, I'm going to do that thing. And after about 2 weeks, my child said, I'm really sad. And I said, I can't fix that. But what I can do is I can sit with you in this space where you feel sad. And something changed in that action, changed the way I parented. And that was 7 years ago. And that child, and actually all my kids, will go, Mum, can you do that thing where you come and sit on the end of the bed? Yeah. So yeah, it's not about solving, it's about sitting with. I think a lot of the solutions are within our children. They will find their way, but they need to feel safe. They need to be in that space where they can have the space to find what that answer is that they're looking for.
Wonderful, wonderful way to end this very, very special session. Once again, thank you so much to all of you for supporting this event, for Beyond, to Rina, to Carrie, to Jeremy. You've been brilliant panelists. Thank you so much indeed. And thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you.